My name is John Harris, and my new book is called Maybe I'm Amazed. It's a memoir about my son James. James is 18 now. He's autistic. He was diagnosed when he was 3, and very quickly music became really our main means of communication. Some days it definitely is our main means of communication, because his language, as happens with a lot of autistic people, is somewhat limited. So records and songs and bands and that whole thing became a real source of connection between us. And in retrospect, I'm not that surprised, because that reflects some of my own history, in the sense that I was obsessed with music from when I was very little. I formed bands at school, and I eventually became a full-time professional music writer. And James's mum, my partner, was a press officer. First of all at Parlophone Records and then at Warner Brothers. And she's from a very musical family. So music was already all around us before James came along. And there it was. It just became this amazing, precious, beautiful thing. And it still is. So the book that I've written is divided into 10 chapters, and each takes its title from a song that really is a part of who James is. And one of the key chapters early on, the chapter title is Autobahn by Craftwerk. Now, apart from the Beatles, who are over here, this is sort of James's musical Rosetta Stone, and has become mine as a consequence. So when James was about 3 or 4, I had an old-fashioned iPod, and once he discovered the Beatles and immersed himself in them, the next thing he went for was Craftwerk. And Autobahn in particular, the 22-minute title track, classic, amazing evocation of a car journey between Dusseldorf and Hamburg, it just became his permanent soundtrack. And he started drawing this stylized motorway logo on every available piece of paper, and then explored further and got into the other Craftwerk albums, The Man Machine, Radioactivity, Trans-Europe Express. And eventually, in 2019, we saw Craftwerk play at the Blue Dot Festival in Cheshire, and it was the greatest gig I've ever seen. And the reason it was the greatest gig I've ever seen was I saw it through his eyes. And I mean, talk about whatever you want to call it, an epiphany, a watershed, whatever. He was just in 7th heaven for the duration of it. So he and all of us in our family are incredibly fond of these German musicians and everything they've achieved. I have to talk about the Beatles. So my first musical memory goes back to when I was about 4, and my mum left me with a babysitter who, I think to shut me up, gave me a copy of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to listen to and to sort of play with, right? And from that point I was obsessed. I remain a complete Beatles obsessive. There's no other band, you know, merits being obsessed to that extent than the Beatles. James is the same. So from when he was about 2, he was really, really interested in the Beatles. And then, not long after that, when he was 3 or 4, I showed him the DVD of Yellow Submarine, the animated film, and that made him even more obsessed. And you know, the Beatles are his sort of alpha and omega. I mean, it's just an amazing presence in his life and my life. I mean, I think the Beatles are sort of an ideal for living, and he kind of feels that as well. So I should mention the Beatles. However, let's jump ahead a few years. One of the chapters is named after the song London Calling by The Clash. James is really, really fond of The Clash, and London Calling in particular, the song and the album. He now plays the bass guitar. And I think his main motivation for getting interested in guitars, which he drew on all his exercise books at school and on every bit of paper at home, and we got him a bass in lockdown, which he very quickly picked up how to play, because that's how musical he is. The Clash were hugely influential in that. Because, you know, the front line of The Clash never have 3 people look cooler with guitars. You know, they're like an advert for the guitar. And James kind of fell for that hook, line and sinker. I've also got very fond memories of him doing karaoke. He does a brilliant Should I Stay or Should I Go karaoke. Right, then another one. He's got cool taste, James. When I was a music journalist writing for the New Musical Express, the NME, one of the great pleasures of my time there was I went on the road with Paul Weller, who was kind of my suburban teenage icon, really. I went on Ireland with him, and he gave me a tape, a mixtape, that had Funkadelic on it. And it had one particular song, Fish, Chips and Sweat, which is a Funkadelic B-side. James got really, really into that, and then through that got really into Funkadelic. You can see why. Who else has had a sleeve like that? I mean, it's sort of in its own very macabre way, is fascinating. James has a very endearing habit sometimes of asking me questions he knows the answer to. And sometimes he'll wake me up in the morning and he says, "What's on the cover of Maggot Brain by Funkadelic?" And I have to say, "A woman's head poking out of the soil." And then all is well in the world again. One last one. I got into the Velvet Underground when I was 17, 18. When I got out the suburbs and went to sixth form college in Manchester, I met genuinely cool people for the first time who liked the Velvets. And I was in a band, and one of the songs we played was I'm Waiting for the Man, which is one of the key tracks on the Velvet Underground and Nico. Anyway, needless to say, that track sat on my iPod and on some Spotify playlists. And my son James, when he was about 7 or 8, he got into it, started playing the keyboard, and we were in it. This is in the book. We ended up in a school concert playing I'm Waiting for the Man, which is a song about scoring heroin in uptown Manhattan. But I don't think any of the audience twigged that, thankfully. So that's a roundabout way of saying he's cooler than I was, because it took me till I was 17 to find this. And he was on it when he was 6.